Picture this. It's 1944. A Japanese soldier has just been saved from the ocean by American soldiers after his plane was shot down. His hands tremble in fear, expecting immediate execution by his captors. Instead, he gets called to the mess hall, receiving a meal larger than his entire crew had seen in 3 days. Yet, after sinking a US ship, why did the United States treat them with so much kindness that one Japanese captain even transformed his life, becoming a Christian missionary in the United States? When the United States finally declared war on the Japanese, the country turned to propaganda, especially discrediting the US Army as being savages that didn't have any real humanity. They preached about how Americans would starve, torture, and even eat their prisoners, being devils who delighted in the suffering of others. In fact, Japanese soldiers were told that fighting and dying was a way of repaying their debts to the emperor, setting off the start of kamikaze pilots who'd sacrifice their lives to destroy the cruelty of the Americans. Each Japanese soldier became more radical than the last, and when they captured American POWs, they put them through excruciating torture, knowing that if the shoe was on the other foot, the Americans would do the same.
Ay kasalukuyang pumupunta sa mga probinsya upang tulungan ang mga Pilipino.
So, when Lieutenant Junior Grade Saburo Kitamura was caught by US sailors on June 20th, 1944, he believed his fate was sealed, and he was now looking at one of the most painful and excruciating deaths imaginable. But what really happened would shock him so much that he'd continue to tell tales of his experience aboard the USS Enterprise, America's most battle-hardened vessel for decades to come. And he wasn't the only one. By the end of the war, more than 35,000 Japanese prisoners would experience the same fate as Lieutenant Kitamura, witnessing a kind of abundance that they were not even treated to in their own country.
In spite of false Bushido propaganda, 9,000 Japanese have surrendered on Okinawa. The Pacific dragnet tightened. Death or surrender is the only choice for Japan.
As the war raged on, the Japanese were running out of oil and food, with widespread famine leading to reduced military rations, and in some cases, soldiers even had to share their food just to make it through the day. Water sources were not even considered, and in some cases, the imperial soldiers had to limit their water consumption on Japanese vessels to ensure that it lasted for the entire journey. In fact, more than 1 million Japanese civilians would die from starvation during the period of war, as the United States had severely cut supply lines. Moreover, imperial sailors only had access to a handful of rice balls and pickled vegetables, with fish having to be caught and then split between an entire crew. It led to weakness on the battlefield and damaged morale that could only be reinforced with propaganda about how bad the United States treated their prisoners. Yet, it was all a lie. On the other side of the Pacific, things were a little different. The United States didn't just have an abundance of food, but their calories were calculated, with 4,100 calories set aside for each sailor every single day. This consisted of fresh and frozen foods, with an abundance of canned foods when supplies were running dry. Even more, they would use seawater and transform it into fresh, drinkable water, even being used for showers, while the Japanese wouldn't only be treated to a bath or shower once every couple of days. The Office of Naval Records shows that carrier mess halls served approximately 15,000 meals each day, with menus rotating the same way they do on modern carriers. Monday might be some roast beef, while Tuesday was fried chicken. On Sundays, cooks went out of their way to even spoil sailors by cooking ham and pineapple, ensuring each individual got more than they needed when it came to calories and sustenance. But this wasn't all. Japanese POWs were even more shocked when they discovered the living quarters of US sailors. Kazuo Sakamaki, America's first Japanese POW, captured a day after Pearl Harbor, remarked that the enemy submarines had showers with hot water. The crews slept in bunks with mattresses and clean sheets. They had a library of books and magazines. The mess hall had a coffee urn that never emptied. They lived better underwater than we lived on land. Meanwhile, the Imperial Navy prayed to the gods for support, as the United States was manufacturing their own. Keeping things cool with refrigeration units and air conditioning, they even served real ice cream at sea. Even more shocking was the laundry facilities, which had industrial washing machines, dryers, and pressing equipment, a stark contrast to the Japanese, who had to rely on seawater to clean their uniforms, not even receiving any new clothing for an entire voyage. The United States also made time for fun, with sailors doing things they love when not in combat or busy with the ship's maintenance. This was something the Japanese barely knew, being absolutely stunned to see ships that had movie theaters that showed some of the latest Hollywood films. while libraries were stocked with the latest books. Even more impressive was the USS Enterprise newspaper, which served as a local newspaper giving sailors some information about what was going on back home. And if they needed to stay in shape, even a fully equipped gymnasium was available. Yet many Imperial soldiers would only realize how wrong they were the moment they were captured. But on the Japanese side, this was a whole lot different. Following the war, information about the Japanese Navy was revealed, where it showed that each sailor was only given about 1,400 calories daily, and this was only when there were enough supplies available. For protein, fish was the main source, yet having a shortage of fuel meant that sailors had to choose whether they go out for fishing or preserve the fuel to make it back to shore. Meanwhile, rice, often days old and potentially even infected by the Bacillus cereus bacteria, were served with pickled vegetables. This had a devastating effect not only on the morale of sailors, but even their health, with numerous sailors often dying thanks to beriberi, scurvy, and even night blindness. But due to widespread propaganda, they were all willing to undertake these journeys, sacrificing themselves for the emperor. It was a nation that preached sacrifice, focusing on continuous propaganda, yet it failed to meaningfully sustain its sailors. As Chief Petty Officer Yoshio Yamada remarked in his diary after spending 3 days aboard the USS Iowa, "The battleship's crew eats in shifts, but the food never stops. They have machines that peel potatoes, slice bread, and make ice. They threw away more food after one meal than my entire ship received in weekly supplies. But when he asked why they waste, the guard simply replied, 'It's not waste if you have unlimited supplies.'" This was further reinforced by another Japanese sailor who was shot down over Iwo Jima, and he spent 2 weeks aboard the USS Bunker Hill before testifying to American interrogators. "Your enlisted sailors live better than our officers. They have radios in their quarters, photographs of girlfriends, and packages from home with chocolate and cigarettes. They complain about food that would be a feast for Japanese admirals. One sailor threw away a candy bar because it had melted slightly. That candy bar represented more sugar than Japanese pilots saw in months." But it wasn't only the food that shocked these sailors. Even the medical facilities were an overwhelming experience. One major difference between the United States and Japan was how they treated their wounded. Instead of fully treating them, Imperial soldiers were given medicine simply to numb the pain and send them back to the front lines regardless of their condition. Yet, when a Japanese POW was rescued from the ocean, they were treated with better care than they had ever experienced before. They were often tested to see if they had any illnesses, given x-rays, and even rushed to emergency surgical units where specialized doctors would save their lives. Antibiotics such as penicillin were like magic to Japanese troops, who saw infected wounds heal in just a few days instead of dying. But it wasn't only the sailors who were treated so kindly. Even the vessels were highly respected with repair facilities that could fix a ship up to standard operating condition in just a few hours. To demonstrate the US supremacy at sea, they'd often stop for repairs, fix the engines, and even manufacture new parts to keep the vessel afloat. This was absolutely vital given the fact that these vessels were thousands of miles from home. Many Japanese kamikaze pilots who survived would bear witness to how the US quickly repaired damaged structures, while damaged Japanese vessels would have to slowly limp back home, unable to defend themselves. It was basically magic. And all this combined to make one man turn from a radical Japanese imperialist to a Christian missionary and evangelist. A staunch supporter of imperialist Japan, Captain Mitsuo Fuchida quickly rose through the ranks of the Japanese Naval Air Force. He logged over 10,000 flight hours, mostly from the deck of aircraft carriers. Thanks to the experience he gained from assisting in the invasion of China, he was quickly enlisted to assist with the invasion of Pearl Harbor. In fact, Captain Fuchida led the first wave of 183 aircraft that attacked Pearl Harbor, with his aircraft miraculously surviving 21 hits by anti-aircraft fire. He was hailed as a hero, and by 1945, when the United States struck Hiroshima, Captain Fuchida was one of the assessors sent to examine the extent of the damage. Miraculously, he survived when every other person in the team died from radiation poisoning. Following the war, he returned to his native Nara prefecture, where he engaged in farming, but was later shunned and described his treatment by the new regime. "The occupation forces put me into a cauldron as a running dog of the militarists, but my Japanese compatriots are building the fire beneath the cauldron to boil me." Around the same time, he read, "I Was a Prisoner of Japan," a religious tract by Jacob de Shazer, who was also captured by the United States as part of the Doolittle Raiders. This would convince him to shift his beliefs, being baptized in 1951 under the Reverend Toshio Saito, who was a minister of the Sakai Church. Over the next 25 years, he'd preached the gospel, at one point even visiting the United States and traveling across 47 of the 50 states. He became one of the few to prove that hatred and war was wrong, and love and forgiveness was needed for society to thrive. But despite the great facilities and value on the USS Enterprise, it wasn't just a comfortable hotel at sea. In fact, it was known as the Grey Ghost, striking fear into the hearts of the Japanese. If you want to find out why it was so deadly, make sure to check out this video next,